On June 25th, 2025, exactly 1 year after the finance bill protests, thousands of young Kenyans filled the streets of Nairobi. For most of the day, it was a peaceful commemoration of those killed and injured the year before. Then, as the sun went down, the atmosphere shifted. Armed men who had nothing to do with the demonstrations had already begun moving through the central business district. As the crowds dispersed, they stayed behind. The next day, Nairobi woke up to scenes of destruction. Quickmart OTC had been ransacked. Businesses around the surrounding area lay looted and destroyed. But it was what happened later that left witnesses baffled. In a twist that felt almost too convenient, some of the men suspected of the looting had conveniently left their IDs behind at the scene. As rumors spread that bodies had been hidden inside Quickmart, the police presence grew heavier. Yet, in those same streets, masked men carrying clubs moved openly through the crowd, attacking civilians in broad daylight while uniformed officers stood by and did nothing.
Identified as goons, and who the questions are, who is arming them and why do they have such power to beat civilians right in front of police officers? So the question is, who are these men and why are they moving with so much command?
Kenya had watched this alliance before, masked enforcers and state machinery working hand in hand against peaceful demonstrators. And as we'd soon learn, it wouldn't be the last time. But as disturbing as those 2 days were, they weren't the most shocking part of that story, because what happened on the streets didn't begin with the protests. In this episode, we'll look at the concerning rise of the modern Kenyan goon, or as the CS prefers to call them, Watchmen.
Official Watchmen or goons?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, it was official Watchmen.
Are those Watchmen?
As I said, to the best of my knowledge, there were cases.
So are those watchmen guarding City Hall?
No, that's what I'm saying. As at the time we had, I'm trying to look at what your
You've seen them walking around with clubs. There you go. Are those watchmen?
We'll look at the slow escalation and how the situation has gotten to a point where the most probable outcomes will change the country for the worst, especially with the upcoming 2027 elections around the corner. Be sure to like the video if you enjoy it and subscribe to the channel for more investigative stories from Kenya. There's a popular quote that says, "The farther back you can look, the farther forward you're likely to see." In 1992, during Kenya's first multi-party election, the ruling party faced the prospect of losing power for the very first time. One of its answers was YK92, a network we covered in an earlier episode that armed and organized ethnic militias to intimidate, displace, and terrorize opposition strongholds ahead of the vote.
Donning the armor of a tribal defense group, the Mungiki, largely in the Rift Valley province, rallied to protect their fellow landless Kikuyu community during the 1992 tribal clashes.
The trigger was, of course, the 1992 clashes, where this group was kicked out of the Rift Valley and they constituted themselves as a Kikuyu Land Defense Force originally, before they did the mutation into Mungiki.
Kanu retained power, and the men who orchestrated the violence were never held accountable. Behind the operation was the Golden Bag scandal, which siphoned billions of shillings from Kenya's economy. Unemployment rates were high, and for many desperate youth, what the gangs offered was work at a time the state offered none. By the time the 1997 election was done, Kanu won again, but the gangs had multiplied and the coordination behind them had become harder to trace as YK92 was disbanded. What had been militias assembled for a single election season hardened into permanent organizations with names, structures, and territories. When 2007 arrived, the politicians came calling again, and the networks that had survived the decade were reactivated to retaliate and hold territory. The crackdown that followed was brutal. Hundreds of young men who had been useful to politicians months earlier were killed or disappeared.
It is now time for those who instill fear and terror in Kenyans to have a dose of their own medicine.
The months that followed would mark a sharp decline in crime associated with the Mungiki, and while Kenyans sighed with relief, the tactics adopted by the police in dealing with the sect were being questioned. A November 2007 report on the alleged arbitrary execution of 454 young men, almost all by a bullet to the head.
Somewhere between 2013 and 2022, the model shifted again. The gangs stopped being tied to a specific tribe or neighborhood. Names like Mungiki still floated around, but the real power moved to something harder to trace: the WhatsApp group. When a mobiliser calls offering 2,000 shillings for a morning's work, more than many will see in a week, the answer is almost always yes. They frame the violence as defense, not as aggression, protecting a community rather than attacking one. They tell a young man from a low-income neighborhood he isn't attacking anyone, he's defending the city from a privileged KFC-eating, Uber-hailing class, and the job stops looking like violence and starts looking like duty.
Unanipe kazi, wewe unatafuta kazi yako. Jenzi, wewe pia tafutia vijana wa asala huku chini. Usitafutie tuseme Goons ni watu wa nini. Na ujuaje siku zote Mwenyezi Mungu si mambo na jenzi na gunzu. Mimi natafuta najua nini. Mimi natafuta jasho yangu, niko na mtu wangu na hustle. Wewe pia wewe una hustle, unajitafutia hustle. Mimi nisha hustle. Wewe usiniambie mambo na gunzu. Gunzu ni siku zote kuja tufanye.
It isn't a hard sell when the alternative is no money at all. A mobiliser gets a call, sends a broadcast to 20 groups, and within the hour, hundreds of men are assembled at a rally, a protest, or a police station, ready to work. The ethnic warrior of 1992 has now evolved into a remote-controlled, on-demand goon that we see today. A week before the June 25th anniversary, a KTN expose laid bare the inner workings of this machine.
The shadowy plot, backed by high-ranking officials within the ruling party and City Hall, aims to unleash violence and chaos under the guise of crowd control and protection of property. A squad of hired goons are on standby to unleash terror, targeting mainly the soft spot of the protests, women, so as to spread panic, as well as execute orders to snatch phones to prevent the documentation of police brutality and rights violations.
One figure didn't need leaked charts to be linked to the machine. He said it himself on camera. Tiaty MP William Kamket was filmed threatening to sponsor 200 men to Nairobi to deal with Gen Z on the June 25th planned demonstrations.
Juzi wamelia ati sijui Sakaja ameleta vijana wachache na rungu hapo na nini ati hapa Nairobi kuwafukuza. Wacha niwaambie kutoka hapa Sigoro, kama mnafikiri hawa vijana wachache wamekuja Nairobi na rungu ndio wameletea shida, mkuje wiki ijayo ndio mjue vijana hapo Okoth wako hapa. Vijana mko wangapi wako tayari kudefend serikali? Twende Nairobi. Twende Nairobi. Tupambane na hao. Tuonyeshe. Waone noma. Waone shida.
Governor Sakaja, named in the same reporting as a beneficiary of the mobilization, denied it outright, saying his politics has never been built on sponsoring violence.
Some of the goons have since confessed that they had been recruited to work on behalf of Nairobi Governor Johnson Sakaja. But the governor has come guns blazing.
I have never and will never sponsor violence of any kind. My entire political life has been anchored on siasa safi, which upholds human dignity, the rule of law, and the democratic rights of every Kenyan.
Some of the men who led the June 17th mobilization were already known figures. One was Swale Sonko,
Na leo tunasema 25th watu wakutane. Mnasema ati magoons, leo mtakutana na magoons hapo tao.
Na sisi tunakuja kulinda mali ya umma na mali ya serikali ya Jamhuri ya Kenya.
Calvince Okoth, better known as Gaucho, had been seen mobilizing outside City Hall. After the protests, the Goons were seen talking about how they'd protected the city.
Governor Sakaja, tumelinda jiji. Watu waogopi wakuje sasa. Wakuje sasa.
10 months later, a Nairobi County Gazette notice appointed Gaucho to the board of Mama Lucy Hospital, signing off a 3-year term. And the message reached many young men watching from these low-income areas. Protect the capital as you're requested, stay loyal, and the state won't just look away, it will reward you. That system, however, is creating a side effect that the politicians had not planned for. Freelancers. Young men who didn't wait for a politician's call. Some who saw Gaucho's success and decided to cut out the middleman, setting up their own crews to extort money and manufacture the need for protection themselves. Cecil Otieno Ouma was the poster child of that divergence. He wasn't new to this world. Activist Boniface Mwangi later said Ouma had shown up uninvited to at least 3 of his own meetings, demanding payment, insisting nobody could hold a meeting in Nairobi without paying him first. That freelancing caught up with him on June 30th, 2026.
Ungefanya meeting Nairobi bila kumlipa, na kuja kwa meeting yako hata kama mjongea naye mjelewana lazima upatie do. Alika meeting kaza mkaa 3 akanisumbua. Na the last meeting nilibonga naye vizuri ilikuwa NDC ya Ukweli Party. Nikamwambia Cecil, by the way, mimi sina deni yako. Tusumbuane kwa hivyo compassion because was harassing me to give him money. Now jana Cecil Otieno amekuwa hired na PS for Youth Affairs Fikirini. Ampeleke vijana kwa mkutano. Wakaenda kwa mkutano and then venye walimaliza mkutano kwa niko na wase 80 wapi do. Waka disagree. Mabodyguard wa Fikirini wakaua Cecil. And that is the truth.
Boniface Mwangi and other people publicly described him as a ruthless enforcer who used violence to get his way. A sentiment echoed widely online as Kenyans grow more frustrated and unsettled by how normal this is becoming, because Ouma was just one of very many mobilizers hired or freelancing, and the system treats all of them as disposable collateral. However, the desperation keeps bringing them back.
Businesses remaining closed and motorists bearing the brunt of goons who descended on them.
In April, gangs blocked roads in Kikuyu at 5 a.m., lighting fires, deflating tires, and beating motorists for 2 hours before residents drove them off themselves. Police arrived only after order had already been restored. 2 months on, President Ruto finally answered. On June 19th, he directed the Murkomen to go after the Goons and the politicians financing them. The test came 3 weeks later after that directive, and it came at a church. On July 12th in Kisumu, 2 rival armed groups clashed outside St. Stephen's SEK Cathedral during a service attended by opposition figures James Orengo and Edwin Sifuna. One group tried to force its way into the compound, the other met them with machetes and rungus. 1 person died, 9 motorcycles were burned, and worshippers had to be walked out through a side gate.
If you want to go to Haiti, Haiti is here. And the violence and the audacity of the violence, the way it is being perpetrated, organized, and carried out has got the hand of the state in it.
Nobody looking at the pictures that have come out of Kisumu today or indeed in Nyahururu can be proud of such a country that you have people just brandishing weapons and walking and marching in the streets to go and attack a congregation in church. I mean, this is the lowest I think we have sunk.
The pattern shows up in the numbers too. The Kofi Annan Foundation's Electoral Vulnerability Index, released this month, puts Kenya's probability of election-related violence in 2027 at 84% and names hired mobs alongside distrust in the IEBC and police conduct among the central drivers. But Ol Kalou complicated that picture. More than 1,000 police officers guarded the constituency on polling day, but hooded men in unmarked vehicles moved through it anyway. Residents and party agents stayed at the polling station regardless, guarding the count themselves.
I want to say thank you that despite the chaos, despite the bullets, despite men in masks trying to take your votes by force, our young men shielded polling stations at gunpoint. Women stood eye to eye with goons and police and did not blink.
And still, DCP's Sami Kamau Waweru won by more than 6-1 on a 57% turnout. That was DCP's first parliamentary seat, wrestled from the ruling coalition all cycle. The machine showed up and it lost anyway. Whether that holds in 2027 is a different question.
According to the ELOG report, 6 armed and masked men are said to have tried to force their way into Huruma Primary School polling station. Elsewhere, a convoy of SUVs, Prados and buses attempted to gain forceful entry at AC Ol Kalou Primary School polling center, reviving fears over credibility of elections come 2027.
A government that believes it might lose doesn't need to win a single vote to stay in control. It has 2 parts and neither require a ballot. In one, hiring muscle stops being a political tactic and becomes an ordinary way to settle disputes, win contracts, or eliminate competitors. A permanent, normalized market that anyone with money can enter, and one that pushes ordinary people toward arming or organizing in self-defense. In the other, the state answers the goon problem with curfews, abductions, and extrajudicial killings carried out in its name, a rationale Kenya has used before. The crackdown that followed 2007 expanded police powers well past the emergency that justified it, and that kind of authority rarely gives itself back. For 30 years, Kenya has tried to dismantle political violence by dismantling the organizations behind it. But in the recent case, there isn't one single organization. Today's militia is a WhatsApp group, a payment, allocation pin, and enough desperate young men to answer it.
There are 130 gangs in Nairobi County alone. Criminal elements whose activities range from political violence, kidnapping, murder, and organized by politicians. While the counties of Kakamega, Busia, Bungoma, Kisii, Kisumu, and Homa Bay named among counties with widespread criminal activities by goons.
Violence simply available on demand. In 2027, every parliamentary seat, every governorship, and the presidency will be contested at once. The question is whether Kenya can stop renting violence before it becomes one of its permanent institutions.
And I think, okay, I remember in one incident someone was saying, you know, why is a policeman walking there with those people who are carrying clubs and he's not doing anything? Let me ask you. I wish you can.
No, you answer that question.
No, yeah,
first.
I'm going to
Why
answer
would a
that
police
question.
officer walk around with someone
I want you to run
holding a
those
room?
figures. I want you to run that.
They are there on the screen.
Yes. Those 2 policemen, vis-a-vis those people, what did you expect the police to do?
Should they just stand and watch? Is that what you say?
Yes.
They stand and watch.
Because if the police do something there, somebody dies, what happens?
You've just said that some of those people are criminals.
No,
You're
that's
saying
what
the
I'm
police
saying.
should just stand there and watch?
Even if the police, you have 2 police officers and you have 2,000, 3,000 people like those ones. What do you want the police? I want you to ask.
No, you tell me.
No,
you're the one in the security sector. You're the one answering the questions. So you think police officers should just stand by?
I support the police officer doing nothing. Because if he attempts to do something in the midst of those criminals, that 2 police officers, because your cameras are able even to pick those people because the police officers are restrained themselves to do nothing because the chaos that will ensue, that police officer will be beaten.
In that team, they're actually being escorted by those.
Just check. They are not being escorted.
There you go.
They are not being escorted.
What do you call that?
They are not being escorted.
What do you call that?
The police officers have restrained themselves.